Does this work better? Great. Great. When you're 5'2", you have to make the necessary adjustments. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm so grateful to share my morning with everyone here on this gorgeous sunny day. I want to thank the Just Majority Coalition for your collective work to raise awareness of our broken court and the urgent need for Supreme Court expansion. If we are serious about strengthening the integrity of our democracy, the time for court reform and expansion is right now. And I'm proud to stand with everyone here today because we are all clear. Enough is enough. Our democracy demands a fair and ethical court. We live in a world where women wake up and literally go online to check the internet if the abortion pill is still legal and accessible. We live in a world where the fate of dreamers hangs by a justice and judicial thread. Dreamers like my husband Boris, who have lived in the U.S. pretty much their entire life, have been waiting for over a decade for a pathway to citizenship. We live in a world where children in elementary schools wake up unsure if the next school shooting is going to be at their own school. And will they survive it? Will their friends survive it? Will their teacher survive it? And how quickly can they go under their desk? That is what 5-year-olds are thinking about as they're getting ready to go to school. We live in a world where there are more mass shootings in 2023 than there are literally days in the year. These are not unconnected coincidences. This is what happens when we have a Supreme Court who is so clearly stacked with justices who seem to have forgotten when they took their oath that it was their responsibility to uphold the Constitution, to serve the people. Not to advance the agenda of far-right billionaires who are only able to become billionaires in the first place by treating people, everyday people, as replaceable labor that is there to exploit their own gain. To get started, all Supreme Court justices need to be held accountable to a code of ethics. The fact that Justice Thomas has taken tens of thousands of dollars in unreported gifts from a Republican, billionaire, mega donor, and hasn't stepped down directly undermines the legitimacy of the highest court in the land. And this is only what is coming into light now after years of going unreported. In addition to lavish luxury trips, gifted properties, private school tuition, we've learned that Justice Thomas's wife was also paid tens of thousands of dollars off the books so that her name didn't appear in billing statements. This is happening right now. Supreme Court justices are appointed for life and wield a great deal of power. They're not elected, so they don't face the same form of accountability that elected officials do. That doesn't, however, exempt them from the accountability that reflects the gravity of their moral responsibility. A code of ethics isn't only the change that needs to happen. We need to expand the courts, and we have to neutralize what's now been years of conservative power grabbing to actually bring the court into alignment with the makeup and the views of the American people. And unless we do that, the civil rights of millions of people, particularly black and brown people, are under direct threat. We have everything on the line. And when questions about our civil rights, our liberties come before the highest court in the land, we deserve a court that isn't for sale to the highest bidder. We deserve a court that hasn't been radicalized by the far-right conservatives who made it clear that the disregard for democratic process and the well-being of all American people. This is our bodily autonomy, our LGBTQ rights, our voting rights, our worker rights. This is about protecting DACA. It's about racial justice. It's about common sense gun reform. This is life or death. And this is why we understand that today we must be standing together, collectively, collaboratively, calling for judicial reform. It doesn't have to be this way. Little children don't have to be waking up worried about school. Mommy, I'd rather just learn from home. Women should not have to be worried about what a judicial court that doesn't represent them will do to their bodies or their children's bodies. And Congress has the power to expand the number of justices on the Supreme Court. We've done it before, and we need to do it again. This is why we're on this tour today. This is why you see leaders from across Illinois standing together, demanding reform. And now it is my honor as the Illinois 3rd Congressional member, which I didn't tell you my name, Delia Ramirez, by the way, Illinois 3. I want to introduce to you a colleague of mine, a brother of mine, someone that I've had the honor and opportunity to serve with in the state legislature, someone who every single day wakes up working and fighting so that our children, our women, our communities have the democracy they deserve. Help me introduce to you State Representative Bob Morgan.
Good morning. Good morning. State Representative Bob Morgan from the 58th District, Southeast Lake County. It is always, but especially today, an honor to follow my friend and former colleague, Congresswoman Delia Ramirez. Delia and I worked together for just a few years in the Illinois General Assembly, and she transformed our state. So I'm so proud of her. I'm so proud to be here with her. And as a general rule, wherever Delia goes on policy issues, I'm very happy to join her because she is fighting every day to improve the lives of people, not just her district, but throughout the country. I'm also proud here today with Just Majority. I'm an attorney, so I discuss the idea of court reform and Supreme Court reform. I don't take that issue lightly. We are trained in law school that the U.S. Supreme Court is the highest law of the land, the most ethical law of the land, that sets our values for the country, that sets the moral compass for our country. And I've believed in that value system for the last 20 years as an attorney. But the last few years has really caused me to question the integrity of the United States Supreme Court. We hear about ethical issues, as Congresswoman Ramirez talked about, the ethical challenges, and that's just what we know about, because the United States Supreme Court does not hold itself or is not held to the standards that any other judge or any other attorney, whether state or federal, is held to. If a state elected or federal elected official participates in things and receives gifts that they don't report, they will be impeached, potentially criminal conduct. If a judge at a state or federal level participates in that unethical conduct and it's revealed, they will be removed from office. There's one exception, and that is the United States Supreme Court. I trusted in that system for many, many years, but what I have seen cannot be ignored. When we talk about the ways in which this Supreme Court has lost its ethical standing, the impact is not theoretical. This is not a theoretical impact on our lives. The Dobbs decision was a direct impact of the Supreme Court justices who have been nominated lying, straight up lying to the American people, saying they will not overturn Roe. They lied. And because there's no accountability, we are left, as Congressman Ramirez talked about, every day women and children are looking at the ways in which this Supreme Court has transformed what we have as rights. They're taking those rights away, and there is no accountability. On guns, we have seen the impact of that as well. Last summer, the United States Supreme Court had a ruling on Bruin, which was a challenge to the New York concealed carry law. The impact effectively was they said the only gun laws that are constitutional are those that are based in historical precedent. It doesn't sound like that's a big deal. It sounds benign. But let me tell you what that looks like. A Texas federal judge decided a ruling based on that Bruin decision that red flag laws are unconstitutional because domestic violence was legal in the 1700s. Think about that. The ways that that is impacting our society, the ways that that's impacting our families and our loved ones, it has a ripple effect that we are seeing every day, and it has to end. We have to take action. We have to take this seriously, because this is a very serious issue that is impacting our lives in a very direct and real way. So we need ethical reform. We need Supreme Court reform. That's why I'm here today. That's why I'm honored to stand with my friend Congresswoman Ramirez. That's why we need to take steps immediately because this situation is urgent and is impacting people's lives. With that, it is my honor to introduce our next speaker, Arnice Merrick.
Thank you, Representative. I'm Arnice Merrick. I'm the lead organizer of Live Free Illinois. We organize those who are directly impacted in the criminal justice system and in congregations in the intersection of public safety and criminal justice reform. I'm here today because there is no democracy if the most marginalized aren't considered. When decisions about common sense gun laws and women's rights are made without those individuals who are directly impacted considered, there is no democracy. Equality and equity should be upheld as a constitutional value. However, politics and privilege reign over justice of what our Supreme Court should be. The issue that American democracy trusts with the Supreme Court determines the outcomes of the lives of real people. The lives and the livelihood of real people should not only be considered, but valued and trusted within the Supreme Court. However, the lack of equity and equality within the Supreme Court prioritizes politics instead of people. The lifetime appointments of Supreme Court justices upholds the staunch commitment to the status quo. We need progression and growth in the Supreme Court that mirrors our ever-changing neighborhoods and communities, for people who are directly impacted by gun violence, for people who are impacted by the laws about how women should be able to use their bodies and how they're determined on how the resources are accessible to them. We call for the reform of the Supreme Court to ensure that the experiences of real people are protected from politics. It's time to reform the court so that it can once again advance justice and equality. Join us in calling for common sense solutions like court expansion to ensure ethical Supreme Court justice, Supreme Court for us all. Again, I'm Arnice Merrick, and I'm here to stand for communities who often don't have a voice to speak for themselves, and where narratives often determine what happens in the Supreme Court. Real people, they live their lives through experiences, not issues, and not politics. We need to save lives, and we need to stand up for real people in the most marginalized communities. Thank you so much, and I'll pass it to Ashby Beasley.
My name is Ashby Beasley. On July 4th, 2022, my 6-year-old son and I became mass shooting survivors in our hometown of Highland Park. As we ran, someone screamed, "The shooter is coming," and in that moment, my son truly believed we were about to be shot and killed. Something inside of him broke, and he is forever changed, and that's why I fight for gun safety legislation, so no other kids have to run or have their lives forever changed by gun violence. Gun violence is a public health crisis and the #1 killer of children and teens. Here in Illinois, we responded to this sobering fact by passing the Protect Illinois Communities Act, a law that banned assault weapons, high-capacity magazines and switches, extended the Firearm Owners Training Act from 6 months to a year, and established an anti-gun trafficking strike force. Illinois became the 9th state to ban assault weapons. Within days of the law passing, gun rights groups filed lawsuits to overturn the Protect Illinois Community Act in its entirety, because the gun lobby doesn't care that 77% of mass shooters who use an assault weapon buy their weapon legally, or that assault weapons kill 6 times as many people per each public mass shooting event. The gun lobby doesn't want to stop gun trafficking or keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people, because they know that gun violence drives up gun sales. When citizens rise up and do the hard work and pass life-saving gun safety legislation, the gun lobby simply turns to the courts they built to overturn it. And the supermajority on the Supreme Court has already paved the way to give the gun lobby exactly what they want. The Supreme Court's decision in Bruin laid out a legal test for gun rules that looks at historical Second Amendment precedent, which could put every single modern-day piece of gun safety legislation at risk of being overturned. So we have to ask, how can the Supreme Court uphold bans and restrictions on weapons that didn't exist before the 20th century? How can the court deliver a fair decision on gun laws that protect domestic violence victims when domestic violence did not become a federal crime until 1994, when the Violence Against Women Act was passed? Most importantly, how can we expect the court to uphold laws that address gun violence as the public health crisis it has become today? We can't. The highest court in America is broken and beholden to special interest groups that put American lives at risk. But we can fight back. The Constitution gives Congress the power to organize the court, and it's time for Congress to act. It's time for all of us to demand the balance of justice be restored. Today, I call on our lawmakers to expand the Supreme Court. And I'm going to introduce Rachel Jacoby.
Good morning. My name is Rachel Jacoby. I am a student, a Highland Park resident, and an organizer with the youth-led gun violence prevention movement March for Our Lives. My generation, Gen Z, is sick and tired of living in fear. We have grown up in a society where gun violence is a daily occurrence. We cannot sit in our classrooms, walk down the street, go to the bank, dance in a club, or attend our Independence Day parade without wondering if we'll be the next victims of gun violence. The most demoralizing part is that when we fight for change and win, hyper-partisan courts can overturn life-saving legislation. That is just plain wrong. Earlier this year, young people from across Illinois, from Highland Park to East St. Louis to Englewood to Waukegan to Peoria and more, made our voices heard and demanded common-sense gun safety legislation to keep us safe. The Illinois legislature, including our elected officials standing with us today, heard our calls and responded by passing the Protect Illinois Communities Act. This important legislation banned weapons of war, high-capacity magazines, and switches, and addressed illegal gun trafficking to keep our communities safe. But now, this legislation is at risk because of a radical Supreme Court majority that has demonstrated its willingness to disregard existing precedent and value the interests of the gun lobby over our lives. We need court reform because our voices are not heard on this court. We need court reform because the few should not have the power to make decisions that contradict the will of the many. We need court reform because the Supreme Court cares more about advancing the agenda of the gun lobby than protecting our right to live free from gun violence. We need court reform because enough is enough. It is now my pleasure to introduce my friend and fellow organizer and March for Our Lives board member, Troy Bosley.
Hello, everybody. I always got to start off with a chant. So I need everybody to repeat after me. Say, we will.
We will.
Change lives.
Change lives.
We will.
We will.
Change lives.
Change lives.
One more time so they understand. Say, we will.
We will.
Change lives.
Change lives.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Trevon Bosley. I'm a board member from March for Our Lives, and I'm also a member of the Brave Youth Leaders of St. Sabina here in Chicago. I'm here to speak for Chicago and those communities across the nation where everyday shootings are everyday problems. Places where COVID-19 was not our first introduction to mass deaths and overcrowded hospitals. You know, the places where poverty rates were already up and living paycheck to paycheck is the norm. I'm from a community that lacked resources and job opportunities far before the pandemic. A community where unemployment rates were already outrageously high and community investment is outrageously low. A place where murders like my brother Terrell or my cousin Vincent were already going unsolved. The pandemic did nothing more than rip off the sheets of lies and broken promises covering problems of impoverished communities across America. I say all that to say we've been fighting this fight for change and equity for a long time. And for the first time in a long time, we can see ourselves on the steps towards progress, whether it be the assault weapons ban we're fighting for here in Illinois or the first bipartisan gun legislation we've seen being signed in 30 years. The steps towards progress were forming, yet now we have a Supreme Court who are not only trying to demolish the steps we've made in the violence prevention movement, but the steps we've built in the women's rights and civil rights movement as well. We have a Supreme Court that values all expense paid vacations and private jet rides over the lives and rights of American citizens. We have a Supreme Court that upholds donations and political affiliations and not liberty and equality. We have a Supreme Court that would rather police women's bodies rather than police weapons of war flooding our communities. We will not stand by while we're being stripped away of our rights, liberties, and most importantly, our lives. Reform of the Supreme Court is not just a want by a couple of people, it is a need for the survival of many American citizens. This is an important time in American history. The saviors and oppressors are being written in real time. And I ask you, what side of history will you be on? Thank you. Next, I want to pass on to Yolanda Droza.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Yolanda Androzo, and I am the Executive Director of 1AIM Illinois. I am proud to be a part of the Just Majority Tour, and I'm excited about this movement. I want to thank the many organizations that make up the Just Majority Coalition and are committed to serving as a check on our courts, keeping them ethical, and ensuring that they protect us. I also want to thank our local officials who are here with us today. They, along with the survivor community and the advocacy community, are the true champions of common sense gun laws for our state. Unfortunately, we cannot ignore the fact that our courts, and the Supreme Court in particular, have become too political and too powerful. At 1AIM, we advocate for common sense, evidence-based gun violence prevention measures to help save lives. We are dedicated to this movement because, as we know far too well, guns are now the leading cause of death for American children and teens, surpassing accidents, car accidents, and cancer. And the numbers keep rising. In Illinois, at least 1,363 people die from gun-related incidents each year, an average of 1 death every 6 hours. Firearms are estimated to be responsible for 80% of all homicides in this state. Over the past decade, gun deaths have surged by a staggering 32%, underscoring the urgent need for comprehensive reform. Black communities bear the brunt of gun violence in Illinois, accounting for nearly half of all firearm deaths. We cannot escape it, and we have had enough. In Illinois, we are among the states leading the nation in passing common sense gun laws. But that's not enough. Without a legal system to protect us, this critical work is at risk of being dismantled. Most recently, in our state, following the horrific mass shooting in Highland Park, an assault weapons ban was passed called the Protect Illinois Communities Act. This act was written as an airtight law for many reasons, mainly because we understood the NRA and the gun lobby would attack it, and we were right. The Protect Illinois Communities Act is currently being challenged in court based on the Supreme Court's decision that overturned New York's gun safety law. We have received positive rulings and are confident in the constitutionality of the Protect Illinois Communities Act. And we should not have to worry that this life-saving law could be torn apart by our legal system. Now, we know the NRA will continue to fight common sense gun legislation. Attacks from opponents are expected. But we should be able to trust that the courts will not act against our safety as well. A fair and just legal system is critical to keeping our children and communities safe. Now, this year, we are working to clarify the Illinois Consumer Fraud Act as another tool to hold bad actors in the gun industry accountable. For contributing to gun violence that is destroying our communities, Illinois could become the 8th state in the nation to clarify its laws to ensure gun manufacturers are held accountable. But this initiative will not matter if the courts can simply tear it apart. And none of our efforts will hold any value if the courts do not recognize them. We cannot allow partisan judges to base their decisions on politics instead of the law. They are granting guns more rights than our children. In the words of a survivor mom who shared her story with me, we aren't losing our children to gun violence. They are being taken from us. And we don't have to live this way. The gun violence epidemic is preventable. One Aim stands with the Just Majority Coalition in ensuring our legal system protects us. Fairness, not partisanship, must dictate what's right. Now, I hope others will join us in this effort to hold our courts accountable to ensure our life-saving laws are upheld for the sake of our children. Thank you. And next, I would like to bring back to the podium Congresswoman Delia Ramirez.
You heard Yolanda, you heard Ashley, you heard Trey, Denise, Rep. Morgan. We are on this tour throughout the country, visiting many cities and hearing from the local leaders, the community themselves, about what is happening when our Supreme Court fails us. This is exactly why we're standing here on, thankfully, a gorgeous sunny day. It could have been a rainy day a couple days ago. But understanding that if we are not intentional about holding those that represent us accountable, then we are failing everyone, and it starts with our children. So thank you for being here. With this, I'll take a couple of questions. Look, Craig, I think it's a conversation we're having in Congress every single day at this point. There is no way that we're talking about democracy without talking about the necessity to expand our courts. And in part, it's because we understand that in this moment where we are, having an unethical court who's supposed to be our justice, and that justice has been completely compromised, that there is no way that we could protect the American people without the necessity of expanding the court. While I know that it has always been a controversial conversation, you are seeing more and more of us talking about it as if, not if, but when, and the urgency of doing it as soon as possible. Well, expanding the courts, right, will allow us to be able to have a better balance and make sure that the Supreme Court justices represent the American people. Right now, that number, and just thinking of if Clarence Thomas gets impeached and who will come, and the polarizing and politicizing of the Supreme Court, that's unacceptable. And we've seen it for far too long. We have young people here who are saying we are tired of you politicizing our bodies, our lives, and our ability to live. We know that expanding the courts is one thing we have to do. I think the second thing is we have to be really intentional looking at proposals to reform the courts as a whole. And there's a number of proposals that are going to be coming up in the next few months that I'm looking forward to working with my colleagues in Congress, working with Just Majority, and working with leaders across the country. Because what we know right now is our Supreme Court justices, and I'll specifically speak to Clarence Thomas, has sold himself, has sold this country. There is no way that the highest Supreme Court, our judicial system at the highest level, could be up for sale and not be held accountable. People are upset. People are tired. People are worried. And this is the moment that we have to come together to expand the courts and demand reform. Any other questions? Well, I want to thank the Just Majority Coalition and every single person that is here today on this beautiful day in Chicago. The tour will continue. We will continue to do the work. And we know that when we organize, we win. We must win if we're going to prioritize our community, our children, and the most marginalized. So let's get to work. Let's expand those courts. Thank you.